fellow gardeners, welcome to Garden with Jenny. I'm Jenny. So today I wanted to do something different. You can see I've situated myself in front of my plant stand here, just to give you some nice appealing stuff. This over here is Bobo's cage. He's in hibernation right now, so he's covered up with a towel and enjoying the warmth of being covered and such. But today's video is actually something new, something different that I kind of want to try and do as I continue to educate myself. I want to kind of show what I'm doing to educate myself by doing what I would love to call a book review. I hate reading, honestly, but reading plant books, art books, comics, or science books I like to read, and most importantly plant books, obviously. So I have actually over the past few days have read this book right here, Hydrangeas in the North, Getting Blooms in the Colder Climates. So I kind of want to show you that a little bit and tell you a little bit about what I have learned from reading that book. It took me probably about 2 to 3 days to read, with a day in between of a break. I didn't read anything yesterday because I actually went to work yesterday and did a little bit of a training thing because the place I'm working at sells outdoor furniture and I know absolutely nothing about outdoor furniture. So I went in to just see some of the catalogs and stuff that they offer, and so I have all that to educate myself on. But let me get you turned around and we'll dive right into this book. Okay, so here's the front cover. Mine's in a little bit of rough shape. I've had it for a few years and I haven't actually read it until this week. I've looked at it a little bit, but now I've read it from cover to cover. So it's beaten up because I think I actually got it wet at one point, and I hate that. I hate that I got it wet, but so my pages have curled down here at the bottom. This gentleman, I have no idea how to pronounce your last name, so I apologize. This gentleman named Tim, he's I believe originally from New York State, which is where I'm from. Originally from Western New York, which is where I'm from. He has been in the horticulture industry for a number of years, and a lot of those years have been managing in the horticulture world, so that's great. I think I picked this up at a Certified Nursery and Landscape Professional Day or at Plantasia, which is a garden center landscape big shebang that is held in Hamburg, New York. Actually, I've done a video on that in the past where I take you around the actual show. So they do different displays and stuff. So this gentleman, I believe, is originally from Western New York. Then he moved down to Virginia, and then he moved back to Central New York near the Finger Lakes region. And basically over his career, he has developed a hatred and then a love for the beautiful hydrangea. And a lot of this book deals with macrophylla hydrangeas, which is a good portion of the book is probably about macrophylla hydrangeas. Then he talks about paniculata hydrangeas, about, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, arborescens hydrangeas, and serrata hydrangeas. I don't usually retain this much information when it comes to reading, but this was just an incredible read. It starts off basically by him giving his backstory about him being from New York and stuff. All these pictures in the book are actually pictures of hydrangeas in his yard, which I think is cool. So in here, he's developed his own way of trying to get macrophylla hydrangeas to bloom in cooler climates. Look at that. That would be so pretty in the yard. Anyways, you can see I've done quite a bit of highlighting in my book, and I do it because it helps me retain the information when I highlight a little bit. So a good portion of this book talks about macrophylla hydrangeas. And what I learned is Hydrangeas like warmer weather as well. But in the milder climates, they tend to get powdery mildew and stuff, and they get a lot bigger. So in the north, they are stunted. Their growth isn't as much. And sometimes because of how harsh, especially Western New York's winters can be, they don't flower after a few years up in the north. And macrophylla hydrangeas, they almost act perennial-like, not necessarily shrub-like, up in like Western New York and Central New York because of how cold it gets. So it basically dies back towards the ground. It doesn't leave a wooded stem, which is, I knew that a little bit, but I didn't understand the mechanics of it. So his book helped me understand the mechanics a little bit better. So this here is where he basically talks about the macrophylla hydrangea in warmer climates. And then here he's talking about how they react in northern climates or cooler climates. And it's just a really fascinating read. So if you have the chance to read this book, I highly suggest it. Even if you're not really interested in hydrangeas, like I am not a tree and shrub person. I have to learn more about it for my job now. But it's actually a really fascinating read. So this is his kind of method that I don't know is set in stone, but first he talks about thinning your hydrangeas. So you're taking a third of the stems and you're cutting them down. If you can see this here, you cut about a third of them back so that they have 1 to 2 nodes on each branch. So you're cutting them low to the ground. This is going to happen in, I think, July. Look at that. It says July right here. So that happens in July. And then step 2 would be, so you're basically getting this type of deal here. You're making, by cutting them back, you're cutting out apical dominance, which is when some plants do this funny thing where if they have a terminal bud, that terminal bud puts out a hormone that stops, which I believe is called auxin, stops these side or lateral buds from actually shooting out. So when you cut the terminal bud off, that hormone disappears and it allows these lower buds to develop. So what he's doing is, by cutting that terminal bud off, which is usually the flower bud, he's trying to force these lower buds to develop, to have a flower bud lower towards the ground so that he can protect them. Now, sometimes he says to fall prune, other times he does not say to fall prune. So this would be like your October time where you take the remaining stems and you cut them back as well, forcing those stems to try and put buds out down here as well. And what he basically says in this book, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to close that, but I had to itch my eye. What he says is, when you're making these lower buds want to puff up like that, there's actually layer upon layer upon layer of what seems to be leaves. And then you finally get the flower bud at the heart of these lateral buds. So you have to have quite a bit of growth to occur during one season for the flower bud to reappear. So he goes on in this book more about fertilizing and things, which I'll get into in a minute. So after step 2, step 3 is to mulch your trimmed down plant, which you're going to be doing this, I believe, towards the end of fall into winter, before the temperatures get colder than about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. This way you're giving the buds a layer of protection. So you can see, if this will focus properly, there are some horizontal notches on these vertical lines, and those represent the horizontal or the lateral buds. And by mulching them, you're creating a barrier that will help to protect them throughout the winter, so that if there's a frost or really cold weather for a sustained amount of time, anything outside of the mulch will probably die back. But this mulch here is to help keep the heat in, to keep these buds above, you know, the tens and teens of Fahrenheit degrees, so that they will basically, this mulch basically creates a warmer climate for the base of the plant. And hopefully with proper fertilizing later on, these lateral buds will grow enough to produce flower spikes. Spikes? I don't know. Oh, man. Ain't she pretty? So then, you know, next spring, when the danger of frost has diminished for the most part, before your buds really start to grow, your lateral buds start to grow, you want to start hand pulling your mulch back away from the stems. So here you originally have, you know, you have this dieback up here because that wasn't insulated by the mulch. And then you have all this internal stuff that was insulated that should be protected, or hopefully is protected. You carefully remove that so that you don't bust off these horizontal buds. And then you go into step 5, which is feeding, which this line here reads, simply put, the 5th step is to feed your hydrangeas a high nitrogen fertilizer monthly, beginning around your area's final frost date and ending by mid-August. Now, he's saying high nitrogen fertilizer, which in some cases acts as, it can inhibit flower growth. But because he says to do high nitrogen, because, like I said before, if I can find that picture of that bud again, these buds have layers upon layers of leaves and stems that need to be pushed out before the flower can even appear. So by giving it a high nitrogen fertilizer, instead of fertilizing with phosphorus, you're getting all that greenery out, and there should be enough in the ground of phosphorus to have that flower bud be okay and emerge. But you have to get all that green, leafy, and stem growth out of this bud before it'll even think about putting out a flower. So that's why he says to do it with a high nitrogen fertilizer, which I think is really an interesting thing. Because, you know, then you could be doing quick release, slow release nitrogen. Either way, he talks about using muracid. Here it is, right there, which has some sulfur in it, not a whole lot of sulfur, or ammonium sulfate. So it lowers the pH of the soil a little bit, but not a whole lot. So here's basically what he's saying. By feeding it high nitrogen, you start off with this in mid-May, where the growth starts to shoot out of these lateral buds. And then by continuing the high nitrogen fertilizer, step 5, around mid-July into August and things, you'll be getting your blooms. And you stop mid-August so that it stops pushing out new growth. So it gives all this growth time to harden off. And then you pretty much just repeat this process, if I'm understanding this correctly, year after year. So here's the 5-step process. Feel free to pause the video and write that down. I've never tried this, but it's really fascinating, and I feel like the science is there to back up his claims. Now, let's see here. There's a section on other tips for growing them in the north. There's chapter 6 actually has, he gives kind of instructions. I don't know where chapter 6 is. I think it's chapter 6. Yep. So chapter 6 talks about growing them in patio planters. And as long as you choose the correct size pot, giving it enough space, you can put it in one of these pots and then pull it into your garage, an attached garage that stays a little bit warmer than outside, and you should be able to recreate the same environment as what it would have in like a milder climate. Wouldn't that be nice on a porch? So most of that there is all about macrophylla hydrangeas, and this just goes on to tell you about putting them away, taking them out. Then he goes into the arborescens species. So there's a chapter about the arborescens species. Or it's not a whole, it's the easier to grow hydrangea chapter. There's a section about arborescens. There's a section about paniculata species, which is what quickfire hydrangea is, and the limelight hydrangea. So there's information about different varieties here, or different cultivars, as well as different species. And then it even goes into quercusifolia species, which is the oak leaf hydrangea, which apparently are the favorite of deer. And then the chapter devoted to Hydrangea serrata, which he gives some steps into those, into taking care of those, and then he dives into the different cultivars. And again, all of these pictures have come from his yard, which to me is just magnificent. A little bit on the back about him at the bottom here. Worked in the retail horticulture industry, management level for over 20 years. Spent most of his years immersed in hydrangeas. So his garden now is in the Finger Lakes region of New York State, which if you look at New York State, it's pretty much smack dab in the middle of the lower portion of New York State. You know, New York State is kind of like this, shaped like this. So if it's backwards L shaped, he's down here in the center down here. So like Albany would be over here, Buffalo's over here. So he's hanging out down here. I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of the knowledge that I had received from this book. It's an excellent read. The storytelling, I think, is what really dragged me in. And I don't really like to read stories, but because it had to do with plants, it was okay and it was cool. Definitely pick this up or rent it from the library if it's at the library. It's an easy read, a quick read, and very informational, and I don't think that anybody will be disappointed in reading this. I've noticed he's got a Facebook page for this book. Hydrangeas in the North Getting Blooms in the Colder Climates is listed as the author. You can check out that Facebook page, and then on there as well shows his newer book that I don't have yet, but I'm really tempted to go get. So I just want to say thank you for tuning in to me ramble about a book for once, and maybe we'll do some more of these in the near future. Until next time, stay green, folks.